welcome to Building SaaS with Python and Django, and my name is Matt Lehman, and on this stream we work on a Django app, and I teach you what I know about web development and walk you through the process of going through a real-world app. We're going to continue on that path tonight. We're going to work on some user interface changes for a feature that I've been working on for the past number of streams. I think I'm getting towards the end and would like to put the finishing touches on it, review the final pull request, and merge it into the app and move on. So that's what we're going to do. If you want to stick around and check that out, I hope you do. If you like what you see, please like, comment, subscribe, follow wherever you are coming from, whether that's YouTube or Twitch. That would be really appreciated. And if you want to support me, you can do so. I'm on patreon.com at /MBLehman, and there you can support me financially. And I do want to shout out and thank those patrons that I do have currently. That's Rupert, Andrew, Dragos, Patrick, Eric, Philip, Miguel, Peter, and Shivan. Those folks make it possible for me to do some extra stuff that that help out the Django community. So I'm really grateful for their support. For those that are live on the Twitch stream, you can ask me anything about Python, Django, or web development. That's what I'm here for. But otherwise, we're going to get into the code if there are no questions. If you do have a question, just drop it in the chat, and please just be friendly. That's all I ask. Okay, so we're going to pick up with a set of to-dos, and of course, right as I start streaming, my printer right next to me decides it's going to do a self-test or something. That's weird. And we have a few spots left in the app that I've marked with some to-do markers and the associated GitHub issue. As a reminder, if this is your first time joining the stream, we're working on this feature to make it possible so that my homeschool application, which is the app we're building, will allow school breaks, so vacation days, to be possible per student. And we worked out all of the details of what that means. We're kind of at the end of that process, so I'm not going to walk you through all of the data changes and model changes and all that stuff. We're going to get into that as we get to these user interface changes that is actually exposing the feature that is available in the underlying system. So we have a set of to-dos that are backed by this particular issue number as things that I still need to check on. So we'll go through this set. Hopefully it encapsulates everything that we need to do. And if not, then, well, we'll do more. Okay. So there are a few comments right in this view. And this is the school break create view. And let's just, as a frame of reference, let's get you able to see where the app is and what the kind of area that we're talking about and the user interface that we're working with. And we can do so by going to port 5000 and go to the app. Whoops, that hasn't been the app name for a while. I forgot I changed that a long time ago. So really we're going to dashboard, not app. Forgot I changed that. And then when we go over to the school year and look at this page, you can see we're messing with, anytime you see a yellow on the screen here, those are breaks, school breaks that we've added for this testing purpose. So I'm working in a test account, and there's just fiddly numbers that we can work with. They did appear on the weekly view as this yellow column of highlight there that says the break. So that's what we're adding. So what we're trying to do is make it possible so that you can have a break for one student and not another. That's what the objective is. So we have this ability already, and this page knows how to do that with the appropriate modeling, but it's really on the creation page and the update page for these that we need to account for some changes. So last week we worked on adding this at a basic level of showing what data should and shouldn't be there. And this is the simpler case because by default we want the application to show that this is checked for every student. We assume that a family in a homeschool, if they're going to take a break, are probably going to take a break on the same day. That's a reasonable assumption. So if you're doing Christmas or whatever holidays you celebrate, then you'd want to have those checked so that it applies to all of your kids. But if you're doing a vacation that a field trip or something that only applies to a single kid, you could uncheck one or the other. And it is the editing cases and stuff that's a little bit harder on this when it comes back, and there's a difference in that. I don't know if you can hear that in the audio, so I apologize. It's strange that a printer wants to do a self-test at a random time of the night, but that's what it is. Okay, so that's the page we're working from. we also have, so the page that we're looking at, this is the view that's backing it, this school break create view. And that's this page. It uses a shared template of the school break form that is actually shared with the equivalent update view. So whatever result we have to do, we have to add context to the update view that is going to be similar to the create view, which we don't have that in yet. So I kind of want to finish off the add view to make sure that that's in a good state, and then move on to the update view so we're not tackling two different views at the same time, even though it represents kind of the same screen, if you will, from a different point of view. So the test this was really about this context right here. Last time we added this get students for school year method on the enrollment class, and we haven't tested that. So let's start there. That seems like a good place to start in the code. I'm going to close this factories that we were looking at previously. This is the other to-do that we have to do. There's some additional validation that must be done to make sure that we don't get ourselves stuck in a bad state. So we'll come back to that when we get to a different to-do. So we're going to go to the Students app and look at the test models for that, because that is where, well, what did I type incorrectly? There we go. That is where the enrollment model is tested. The enrollment is a model that represents the linking between a student and a particular school year. So every student is enrolled in a certain grade level in a school year, and the enrollment is what captures that association. And it's what needs to be shown here, because we don't want to show students who are not enrolled in the current school year, because they're not going to go on a break if they're not part of the school year. So when we come down in here, we should be able to find a test enrollment class. Here it is. And I'm going to add a new method here that is this get students for school year. So test get students. Get students for school year. And the test doc string that we'll add is find any, what should we say? Enrollments, no. Yeah, let's stick with find. Finds any students that are part of a school year. Okay, so to begin this, we'll use the Enrollment Factory. I use Django, I use Factory Boy, which is a system for making test data. And so the Enrollment Factory will build not only the student, but also any associated data that must go in. So there's some foreign key relationships on the enrollment that need to be factored in, and the Enrollment Factory is going to build all of those things. So I want to have, let's see, what do we need? We probably just need to check that one student is in there. That should be a sufficient test. So the other thing that we need is a student, and I'm trying to think if we should add any extra data about them. So we probably want to confirm that they are not, like we want to make a comparable example. So probably a student that belongs to the school is at least appropriate. So we should be able to use the, we'll say the unenrolled student is what we want to create. In fact, we don't even need to have a local variable, but we'll use the student factory, and we have to give it the parameters that we want to make some comparable data. And so a student has a connection. What do they have a connection to? That's a good question. Let's look up. It's been a little while since I've looked at the model. It has a connection to a school year. Okay. Or to a school, excuse me. So we can say that the school, we want these to match. So that the enrollment also has, if you follow the path back far enough, a school as well. So we can go enrollment, and there's going to be a grade level associated with the enrollment. So we're going to query that. And then we want to take there's a school year that is associated with that grade level, and then ultimately the school year has a school associated with it. So this will do two things. This will create this enrollment factory will create a student, and this student factory will also create a student. So we've now got two students for the test, but one is enrolled in the school year and the other is not. But both students are part of the same, should be part of the same school. So now we can use this class method, and we can say students is equal to enrollment.get students for school year, and pass it the, well, what do we need to pass it? The enrollment, grade level, school year. All right. And then finally, we want to assert that the students is a list that's equal to the enrolled student. That's going to be enrollment.student. That's the other parameter that's attached to this. All right. Run that test, and it passes. So this is a test kind of showing the API for this. I'm wondering if we could make this any cleaner. I mean, maybe we could extract a single variable. Was this going to look cleaner or not? I don't know. Let's try it. So let's do school year is equal to enrollment. This way it'll just read, I think, in a nicer way. It's going to be equivalent in functionality, but you'll see how it cleans this up. So we can take this, and now we're doing something more comparable, and then we can drop this stuff, and it'll filter it down. So it made it shorter too. So by using a little local variable, it kind of just tells a slightly better story for the test. So that's our test. And let's go ahead and move this to-do down to the context on the update view so that we remember in the right spot. And let's see what's left here. Oh, this other to-do is also for the update view. Okay, cool. All right, so I think we're down to 3 to-dos. And one is that validation one that I mentioned. We'll get to those in a minute. And then we've got these two about modifying the update view. So let's close this and close this. We'll get to the right spot. We want to put the, oh, maybe there's another test I might need. I might be missing a test. I don't know if I added this or not. So let's look at the schools app, the test views file, and let's look for the test school break create view. Yeah, I'm missing some context here that I want to include. So the school break create view should be able to show that we have students in it that are enrolled. And the reason I want to include this test is I want to be able to kind of stipulate, here's the context that I expect that the template is going to use. And so this is a way of just indicating to myself in the future of, here's the context that's actually important to this template, and don't go deleting any context before you're ready. So let's add an enrollment here, and we'll do enrollment. In fact, we're going to need that as a local variable, and we'll do enrollment is equal to the enrollment factory, and we will pass in the school year to the grade level. That way we get a comparable, something that actually shows up here. And then we can say assert self get context. And this actually kind of duplicates a little bit our logic, frankly, from that other test. But the other test at least shows it in the single place where it's defined, and you would expect it to be defined, which is in the models file. And this is more testing that it's present in the context, which is something slightly different, I suppose. So we'll check that enrollment student is in there. All right, and then we'll run this test. Hopefully that'll pass. Great. The other part about this is that this test runs quite a bit slower. That takes 1.21 seconds, and the model test doesn't have to go through all of the machinery of Django and went quite a bit faster. I don't remember the time. I wasn't paying super close attention to that. But now at least we have we've indicated that this school break create view has the students in the context. And while we're at it, the update view, we should put that. So there's an update view down here that has a similar get, and we can assert, we can put that enrollment there and come back up to this other one and take the same assert and use this as a little bit of test-driven development this time. So because we want to be able to display the students as well here, so we'll take this from the school break this time since I didn't assign to a local variable. So the school break has a school year. That should do it. So we should get a failure on the student is not in the context, which is what it's saying here. Kind of not in the clearest way. It's saying false is not true. That message would be clearer if they actually inspected the fact that it really should be it should just be different. But I'm not, that's from something from Test Plus that whatever. Things could always be better. I'm grateful that Test Plus exists. It's a useful tool. Okay, so now we know that we need to add students to the context of the update view. That's the claim anyway. Let's see if that's actually true. So the difference this time is that school year is still added to the context because that's a piece that's needed, but it gets it from the object. So the update view is different from the create view in that the object already exists. So create view, there is no object yet. Nothing's been persisted. This time, though, we know that there is an object. Hi, Stephen. Welcome. I actually don't know what Kia Ora means, so I'm hoping that says hello, or maybe you can educate me on that. But welcome back. So we need to put in the students that we're going to work with, and we need to access them through the same object pattern that's here. So it'll go like that. But here's the difference this time. We have to kind of modify this list so that we know who is and isn't enrolled. And that's something that we'll have to add some extra querying for. Or I said that wrong. Not who isn't enrolled, but if there are additional many-to-many relationships, because that's going to have to be matched up. Oh, very cool. I speak other languages? Apart from Python, sort of. I learned Spanish in high school, and I guess in elementary school I did a little bit as well. So I know enough to fumble my way around through a Spanish-speaking part of the world. And then I recently have been learning Chinese and a tiny bit of Russian for fun. But I would not consider myself proficient in any of them. So I'm kind of a typical American in many ways that I can only really claim to be very solid in English, unfortunately. Anyway, so we need to add extra data to this student's context. And I think I don't typically like to do what I'm about to recommend, but I'm going to probably do it anyway. And what I'm going to say is that, Python is nice in that objects can be assigned attributes at any time. So there's nothing stopping us from taking the list of students that comes back. In fact, while we're here, let's change this. So let's keep some part of this. Let's double this up. So we want to then change this to students, because I think I'm going to work with this locally, and then assign students here. Okay. And then, in fact, while we're at it, let's go ahead and check the test. So this test should pass. Okay. But the problem with the test that is not captured is that when we're in the editing mode, we need to show which boxes to have checked or unchecked in the process of the updating. And that's something that is a critical element of this. So what can we do? I could either do one of two things. I could say, instead of having students be the context in the dictionary, I could instead do something like this, which is, and I'll hack this up, but I don't think it's a solution I want to go with, but I'll start that way. So I could instead do a comprehension that is actually a dictionary, and it's student as the key and value, and then is on break or something like that, which I'll just say true for the moment, because it's just illustrative for student in students. And this is like a way that this could be done, but the problem with that is that the template will then have different expectations about context. In one hand, let's look at the template. It'll be easier to describe it if we can see it. So we want to go to the school break form, and we'll put that in a vertical split here. Oh man, it's too small. Let's get rid of the quick fix window here and reopen this in. Okay, not the best view, but it'll work well enough. Okay, so the problem is that in the create version of this, students is just this flat list. And we can display students here. Thank you, Shivan. I really appreciate your comment there. Will is excellent as well. He does a lot of good stuff. I've had the opportunity to meet him at DjangoCon too, and he's a really nice individual. He's very pleasant to be around. So definitely there's some good-hearted people in the Django community that I really appreciate, and I appreciate your comment there. So if we have this create view that is just a list of students, yeah, I got to be on Django chat. That was a fun discussion with Will and Carlton. Really, they do a good job hosting that. If we have a list of students here, then iterating over this simply is nice. Like, there's no ambiguity about context. Like, it's just a student, and we know that a student is one of the models, so it's very clear what this is. What is less clear is if we put it in this other structure, where it's now like student is really like student info, and then you'd have to iterate over student info dot, or like some kind of indicator that it's a container. And I go back and forth on this a lot, because I've actually done this on many occasions of I've had to wrap up the data, some piece of model data, with extra context. And so I'm not foreign to doing this approach. And maybe there's an argument that says, well, you know what, actually I should do is not test this, but anyway, we'll see. So here's my other thought. What if instead, yes, that's sort of true, I think, Shivan, but the difference is this update view doesn't know anything about students. So it knows about school breaks. So it would be an object if it was all about school breaks. It was like a list view, for school breaks, but this is extra stuff that is outside of the default model view kind of stuff. So I'm kind of going my own way here a little bit to incorporate a little bit of extra data. But yeah, here's actually your point. Here's the object that is already created from the edit view. So I think what I want to try and do instead, in fact, let's do this, and let's see if MyPy grumbles at me, because it might with what I'm about to suggest, is instead of doing this dictionary structure, I'm going to take advantage of Python being Python, and I can't do this in a comprehension. So let's change this. We will do, all right. This is looking pretty hacky, but it's okay. For student and students, and then I'm drawing a blank on a good name here. Students on break. I don't know. It's a crummy name. We just need a local name. And I need to be able to type. Good gracious. Students on break. So we want this to be an empty list. Oh, what am I doing? I just need to iterate and modify. I don't know what I'm going crazy here. So we still want students to be students. So that's all good. But we want a for loop that is adding an attribute to this. And we'll say that it's just true for the moment. Now, the question is, I have MyPy, and I think it's make MyPy. Okay, so MyPy is not going to complain. That's good. I was afraid that it's possible that since the student model doesn't have this attribute, and I'm just kind of adding it on my own, that it might have complained and said like, hey, you're adding a Boolean to something that doesn't have this Boolean, and what are you doing? MyPy can be a little strict about stuff. So I think what I really want to do is I want to find out, are there any breaks that are not specific to a student? And I'm not saying that well. In the many-to-many field that is keeping track of the school break and the list of students, there will be rows in there that have that mapping. And I want to get those if they exist for this break. And for any breaks that any students that don't show up in that list, we need to mark this as true and false. And that way we can then come into this on the edit side here, which is coming out pretty funky. But if we're in the edit version of this, which is this area, we can then display, gosh, that looks so, my editor really does not like what I'm doing with this kind of markup style. I'm going to convince it that you're going to stay. So then we can come in here and then check on that parameter, that Boolean attribute, and that will determine whether we list this as checked or not. And then the form is going to do all the processing that actually will clean this up appropriately. So I think that's what we need. It's really just a couple of lines in total, but we have to set the data up correctly first. So we want to go to the object, and we want to get the students out. And I want to do probably well, we'll need to do a couple things. We can still use that really crummy name, although this might be more accurate now. Students on break is going to be self.objects.students. And then this is a related manager. So we have to treat this like something that we have to query against. So that'll give us the students on break, and then all of them. And that'll be actual student records, which really is way more info than we need. but that's fine. It's really truly fine. But what we need to do is then modify this list of students. So we want to go through each student, and we want to default assume that everybody is on break. Because remember, if there are no rows in this many-to-many field, it's the default assumption that everything is on break. So that is the default case that we want. So we're going to set everything to true by default, and then we'll do an extra check here that for the student. So if there are students on break, this is one of the conditions here. Yeah, I'm happy to get to your question in just a second here, Shiv, and let me finish up this little for loop, and then I'll be happy to jump to your topic there. So we're going to take the students on break, and we want to check that everything exists, or that there's actually values in here. Because if there's not any values in here, then that's a waste of time. So actually, this check will force the evaluation, because the students on break is going to be a query set, and the query set's not going to evaluate. But once it does, it will evaluate once and keep it cached. So it does seem like it might be a performance penalty to check this every time, but it's just going to do the evaluation on the first loop through. So if there are students on break, is the first check, and then we want to say if the student and the student is not in students on break, then that's when we want to flip the bit here to be false. And I'm going to probably rewrite this in a minute. I'm seeing simpler ways that this could be done. Yeah. All right. So anytime you see this pattern where you've got an if, and all you're doing is setting a true or a false, really what you're saying is that the condition, that Boolean, is really the outcome of this if statement. So we can really rearrange this and represent it such that I think, well, we'll start with this more complicated version and give ourselves a test, and then we can come back and get a more accurate version. So I'll pause there though and come to your question about hash fields, Shivan. So yeah, I use the primary keys internally. Do you have to pass that? All right, let's take a look at one of my existing hash fields, and I can just show you the example, and you can decide whether it makes sense to you. Because what I did is actually slightly different from what you're suggesting, although your solution works as well. So if we look at what is something that has a hash field, the schools app should have a hash field. So let's quit out of the template so you can actually see for a minute, and go to the schools models and go replace that file for a second. And if we go to a school year, which is something that is definitely what uses the hash ID field. Okay, you added a reference ID. Yeah, I think that is an acceptable way to go. So here's my example. So what I am doing here is a little bit different from having a separate ID. And your route totally works as is like I think I talked to you about having an external, something that you treat separately, which looks like it's up in your paragraph above. So I use the actual primary key and use this auto field. The thing that I think is going to matter no matter what that you want to put in here is probably some kind of salt value. So if I bring up the documentation for hash ID, there was another like auto field or another field type that you could use that wasn't auto field. That is just something extra that you add to your model. Maybe you're using this this documentation here. So that's going to add, I wouldn't set, and I think I got this suggestion from Carlton Gibson, actually, of Django Chat. So I think I'd asked on Twitter about if people use this, and I believe it was Carlton who made the suggestion of you want to change your salt. And the reason why, so what I would, and it doesn't have to be complicated. Like you can see I've got an F string, so I have the global salt here, the hash field salt, that I think is a setting that you have to supply for this package. And all I've done is prefix it with a school year, the model name, to give it something different to use as its salt value, and it will generate different values. The reason for doing that is if you use the same salt for all your stuff, then let's say you have two models. You've got model A and model B, and not being very creative with my naming here. But the instance of a.id, or reference ID in this case, might be something like A, B, C, D, E, F. I don't remember exactly how many characters the hash IDs have. But if you have the same salt, if the AID, or if the count number, so if A reference ID is equal to B reference ID, just like that, then the actual value that you'd see, the hash of B reference ID, would also be A, B, C, D, E, F. So the salt value guarantees that if you had different salts for them, then B reference ID might be, just something different. G, I don't know, H, whatever. Yeah. I can't remember my alphabet right now. It's weird. My brain is not wanting to do start from where you are. E, F, G, H. Yeah, there we go. Okay, something like that. Anyway, so that's the value of the salt. I think a salt, you're going to need to read the documentation there. I don't remember any constraints on the salt. I think it just needs to be a string of some kind. So as long as it's a string, you should be okay. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it doesn't care. Ah, gotcha. Yeah. So I think you're good. So I presume that the hash ID field, when you add it, will add a number. Now, if you already have existing, what you might want to check on your if you add a migration or you do this locally, I would suggest with a local check, have a couple of users, or I think that was your model that you're referencing. Yeah, you got the abstract user. So have some users that don't have any reference ID. Add the reference ID in the way that it's suggesting here. Run the migration and see if in the migration process, each ID that was added was actually unique for that particular user. I would hope it would be, but there's a possibility that the hash ID field, when it's being added to an existing model, might be giving it the same value to start, which would obviously be quite bad for what you're looking to do. It may be unfounded fear on my part, but as a sanity check for yourself for later, that's something that I would recommend checking on. Hopefully that answers your question. All right, so let's go back to the view here. And great, glad to hear it. So as I was saying, well, we actually didn't modify the test. So let's go to this test, and we want to say, well, okay, let's pull this out. This is going to be actual. No, we can leave it as students. We don't have to get fancy here. students. There we go. And then after here, we can assert students is equal to enrollment student. Ooh. What happened? Ah, it's not objects. It's object. Okay. So that test still passes, which is good. But we also now want to check that that there is a student that is on break attribute. So we want to assert that the first student, the only student in this list of students, is on break is equal to, well, just assert, because that should be a true statement. All right, yep. Now, the other thing that we want to do is, I think I want to make this test a little bit more complicated and do the, do we want it in this test or I don't want a separate test? We could do another enrollment. And we would want to do it on the same school break. So that needs to be, what does it need? We need to create a break. I've got this out of order. That's the problem. Well, crud. All right, talk it out. We want to have both of these students. So this data is not correct yet. That's the reality. So this enrollment needs to have a school break be associated with it. So we want one of them to be, we want this to be a break for one student, but not for another student. So they both need to be enrolled in the same school year, ideally in the same grade level. So we'll come to this second one and we'll say grade level is equal to the enrollment above dot grade level. So remember, the factory is going to create a second student because we're not providing it here. And so we've now got two enrollments, but we're overwriting the first enrollment, which is not good. We're shadowing that variable. But what we need is we ultimately want this to be a list of two things. So we're going to have both of them. Enrollment 1 and enrollment 2. And we've got enrollment 1. So I'm just making the data more accurate to what we're trying to represent. And coming down here, we need this to be enrollment 1. This should fail even if I get the variables right, because it's one will have a list of 2 items, and then the other will have just a list of 1. So we need to add the second enrollment here. And I'm realizing now that we're going to have to provide even more data because I made this sort by first name. So this isn't going to be deterministic. It's only going to work some of the time because it's by the first name. So sometimes this will pass, sometimes this will fail. So that was a case where it didn't pass. And I'm going to switch it to a different version of this that uses a more verbose output so we can actually see everything. So we can see that the order is different. So this is Adam, and I did this by first name, so Adam is expected to come first. So if we test it again, one of these times, see, there we got a pass. So that would be annoying. So we need to come up here and we need to say student first name is equal to Alice, I guess, classic. like a security kind of thing. And then we'll do that. This is equal to Bob. Alice and Bob. All right. So now this test should deterministically pass because it's always sorted by first name. The other thing we want to do is we want to make the school break only apply to one of the students. And that's where we can check. Well, you need to pick one. And so we want to say that, let's say that the school break, Alice gets to go on break, Bob does not. So school break dot students dot add enrollment one dot student. So now Alice is added to the many table so that only one student is truly on break. This should still pass because the first student is on break. So we haven't hit that other condition. But if we change this to include the second student should not be on break. This should be false for that student if we did it right. And it is. So we want this to be the not of this. Okay. So we now have the passing test that I expect in this test setup. It's got the arrangement of data. This test is getting a little bit more complicated. Yeah, we should probably even leave a comment here of why it's getting more complicated like this. Make only one student on break. Because I think future me is going to be like, what the heck is he doing in here? So now that we have that, we can correct and simplify this logic. So as I said earlier, if you have a condition where you have a Boolean check here, and it's a true or a false, you can condense that Boolean down into a single line effectively. So but what's important though is to notice that this is actually inverted, so that if let me comment. Let's have both solutions in place so that you can see what I'm talking about, and then you can see how it will be different. So we'll kind of keep one. We'll comment it out for now, and the solution that I could start with is to say take all of this stuff and put it at the end here. So we've got students on break and like so. All right. But this is actually wrong. This version of this. And it's wrong because it's backwards. So because this if condition is actually setting this to false, when really what this version does is like, it's as if this version right here is as if we wrote false, assuming false by default, and setting this to true when that statement turns out. So we can fix this. We still want this to be a bool, and I'll explain why in a second. We could put a not in front of it, and that flips it so that it's in the right sequence. So that test should pass now. All right. Why did I wrap this one with a bool? All right. Have a good one, Shivan. Back to work for you. I wrapped this with a bool because this is a short circuit operation here with this and. If the and fails and student on break is empty, and we didn't wrap it with a bool, then what would be assigned to is on break is not actually a Boolean, but an empty list, and that's going to cause confusion. So we wrap it with a bool to force the evaluation of that expression into a true or false. And then we flip it because that's the logic that we actually want. And that simplifies that. I mean, you might argue that, one might argue that it's not actually simplified, which could be a fair critique. But yeah, that's the way I view things on this at the moment. Okay, so here we are. We've got students, and we now have this isOnBreak attribute that we can use. We've written the test for it, and I think we're ready to return to the template and modify that template so that it actually shows what we expect it to show. So here, we want to add checked only if the student is on the break. So we can do that by, wow, it really does not like that. So we're going to just put it way over here for the moment. So if the student is on break, then we want this to be checked. And that's it. We'll put the end if. And pull this way back over so that my editor stops being weird. Okay. So that's the condition that should display the edit version of this properly, is the hope. And I think that might take care of both of these to-dos. Let's go check it out though. All right, so we're going to return back to the school year page where they have existing breaks, and we'll pick one. So both of these are checked right now. So let's make it so that Faye does not have a break on this date. And let's remember the date. So this is 9/16. So update that. And it still shows on the calendar because there still is a student that has that. But if we come back in here with any luck, yeah, cool. Faye is now not listed here because Faye was not on break. Should be able to check that again, update it again, and return. And there we go. Conversely, do mark and come back and mark. Awesome. So that's both. As a sanity check, sanity check is actually the thing that we want to validate against. So I was about to uncheck both of these and see what happens. If we uncheck both of these right now, the code would allow it. And this is a condition that I don't want to have happen. I want there to be, it doesn't make sense to have a school break on the calendar when there are students that can enroll and there are no students selected. Why would you do that? So if there are students that are enrolled, which there are 2 in this case, you must pick at least one. That's the other thing that we want to test. So I canceled that. So this is the version where 1 is. All right, it seems to be working like we want. That's pretty cool. That represents a lot of work that has been done over many, many weeks. So we've added it to the view. We have we've fixed the template to show it. I think we're pretty good there. Let's see what we've got so far. So we updated the test to have this. We checked that it's in the context. We've gone down to the edit version of this. We made the test data setup a little bit more complicated so that we could represent and test this isOnBreak logic. Great. We got rid of the to-dos, those 3 to-dos, and we've got the logic in the update view to actually add that appropriate student information to the context there. And then we've got the test, that was that first to-do. So this is the other test that actually tests the model method and checks that the data is appropriate. And then finally, we've got this extra else clause on the template to actually show the appropriate data for the update view. So we're done with those. And let's return. And I believe there was one more to do, and it's in the form. This one should not be too tough to knock out. So this is where I said we need to do that data validation. So at least one student must be checked if there are enrolled students. All right, let's see here. This is not something that we want to put in the save. I dropped it in there, but we probably want to have a test first. So let's bring up the school's test forms, and we can use what test. This is the school break form. Yep. Test school break. Here we are. So we want a test that goes after all of these, which is at the very end. So test at least one enrolled. So when students are enrolled, at least one must be on a break. For this break day form, that's the context that makes sense. Let's get rid of the quick fix window there. And we need the setup. So let's get the happy path test of when this actually works. Or really, no, we don't want the create when it's created. We want one that's already existing, because we're talking about updating an existing one. Is that right? No. Create would work too. Oh, this is tricky. This is a really hard case to get to. Because it's hard to get to because it only comes up when you've gone to this edit case. Like on the create version of this, if there are no existing rows in the many-to-many relationship between school break and students, that means that the school break applies to all the students. And in that case is okay. We actually don't want an error to come out that way. So the create side of this doesn't really matter. There's nothing to validate on the form in that regard, because the object doesn't exist yet. There's just nothing to check against. We only want to ensure that we can't be stuck in a state where, well, maybe I'm thinking through this now. I'm thinking like, what would happen? Okay. Here's why this can't be permitted. I can't leave a school break around because with no students checked, because it would actually have the opposite effect of what the user desired. So remember I said, as this is modeled, there's a many-to-many, and the many-to-many field, any of those rows that are for a break, that actually represents that a school break should only be for a subset. And when there are none of those, it applies to everybody. But if we make it so that you can edit a break and take away and uncheck all of those students, the user would expect that it doesn't apply to any of the students. And that doesn't work with the way the data is modeled. So that's why this is important to check. I just wanted to make sure that I had a clear understanding myself of, is this in fact needed? And yeah, I believe it is. So I want to work from an existing instance, I think. So we want to find one that uses instance, which is one that's already there. So let's take this, and I don't know if this is quite right what we want, but we'll start with that. So we've got a school break, and this was about something totally different. So we've got the school year ID, that's not going to change. We'll keep the school break start date and the school break end date. So we're not modifying, we don't care about any of the date parameters. We don't want that to break the test. And we're going to say right now this should still be valid. Let's just check that it is. Okay. So what we want is to modify this so that there is a student on this break. So let's create let's do something that's pretty representative here. So we want to do enrollment is equal to Enrollment Factory, and we want to set the grade level school year to be the same as the school breaks school year. Okay, so that'll give us a student to work with that is enrolled in this school year for this that matches with the school break. And then we can say we actually want a second one of these, and we're going to make it so that it's part of the same grade level just to get more accurate here. So enrollment grade level. So now there's two students that are enrolled in this grade level, and they're part of the same school year, and they both have a break on this day. At this moment, since there's nothing in the many-to-many field, it applies to both students. This should still pass. There's nothing that we've changed about it. We just are setting up some additional data around this. What we want to do, though, is that we want this to be specific to a singular student. So we want to say the we only need one of these to matter, so we only need to keep one enrollment, and we'll do we'll do school break dot students dot add enrollment student. Again, we haven't modified anything, so we're not changing anything yet. What we do need to change, though, is going to be in the actual. Oh, well, now we've got a more challenging task ahead of us. So the way I did this was the key in the data is equal to the student's ID. So that is the enrollment student ID. And the value on that side is the enrollment student ID. So this, again, is not changing anything. In fact, this is still, we're not even calling save, so we're really not changing anything. We're just being more exact about the data that we're trying to simulate here. This is the scenario that you would want if you weren't changing the checkboxes on that form. So this is like, coming back to this example, let's start up the server again. So let's go in here, and so what we're kind of setting up, just to make it really clear, we've got two enrollments. The first one is part of this break. So let's make it like this. So this is the scenario we've got. The first one is part of this break, right? And we can actually look at the payload for this. Bring up the inspector tools. I thought that was Command-Shift-I. Am I wrong? Alt-Shift-I. I'm thinking of Chrome. I think it's Command-Shift-I in Chrome. So when we hit submit here, you should see the student ID with the value of that ID. It'll be in the post. So we've got the post, and we can look at the request data that went with it. So it's got the school year start and end date. Those are all fields that we have. We're including description, which we're not doing over here. Technically, it would be more correct to include that, but we don't have to. And then there's also a CSRF middleware token. Don't worry about that. That's for the CSRF protection, but that gets stripped off by the time it gets to the form. And we have the student. This is the extra attribute that we're going to care about, which is the ID value. Okay. So what we really want to do is remove this. We don't want this. We're going to pretend that we're taking it off, but we're not including any student IDs. And that's the scenario that is actually the bad one, where it's gone down to unchecking both of those, and then it adds that ambiguity in the data modeling where it would clear the many-to-many table, and that would cause bad news because it would actually have the opposite effect of what the user expects. So this is what we really want to be is valid is not valid. And I want to find, surely there's a place where I have errors in here that are checked against. Okay. The non-field errors, which is what this is going to be. It's going to be part of a clean method. And we can do something like this. Okay, this is going to fail right now because we haven't added the actual test. Let's get rid of this to-do because we don't need to keep it. And I want to come up to the clean. This might actually be wrong right here. I'm not going to worry about it. The instance, it's possible, could not have a primary ID, a primary key yet. So this could be wrong, but whatever. Not going to worry about it. We want to go up into the main clean method. And I guess the question becomes, where do I want to check this? Let's just put it at the end for now. And if something blows up, then we'll have learned something. Because as I said just a moment ago, I think that this instance can be set to something like on a create and not be there yet. But I could be wrong about that. So let's assume that it is just self.instance. That should refer to the school break. So there's another test that we need to write later. To do 434 write test when no enrollments. That's the other test that we need. So if there are enrolled students, well, actually, let's ignore the enrolled students part yet, because that is the other test that I want to have that I think will represent this well. So let's just take the naive approach, and let's say if self instance students count is greater than 0. So that is like the specific filtering. And there is no key that starts with students. So of all of the data, how would we write that concisely? and not. Oh, man. Okay. Let's get some working syntax. I think I'm going to put this in a separate variable to make this more easy to understand because it's going to be too big of a condition. I want this to be a Boolean. No student IDs. So we only really care about the Boolean aspect of it. We don't care about the actual values. And we want to loop through the data. Yep. And so we can use a Python method here of any, I think. And any key in self data if key starts with student with a dash. So what is wrong with this call here? Why is that invalid syntax? Ah, come on, Matt. For key. There we go. So if this evaluates, this is the raw data dictionary, and you can see it in here in a test. It's coming out literally as the dictionary that I'm passing it in as. When you do iteration on a dictionary by default, it looks at the keys. So it's going to look through here and see, do any of you start with student dash? And that will be an empty list. And an empty list with any called on it should be false. Any on the list is false. So actually, this is more accurate to say has student IDs. And then we can over here say if you have stuff in this many-to-many table, so you're already doing specific filtering for the school break, and you don't have student IDs, if not has student IDs, then that's the error condition. Okay. So we want to then say add error. At least one student must be on break. Okay, this test will still fail because the messages don't match up, but we hit the condition. So it tells me we set this up properly. We can delete this. I'm pretty sure this is right. Thanks, Quatley. Thank you for joining in. Appreciate it. So let's correct the error message. At least one student must be on break. And now we should have a passing test. We might, let's see if we have a passing file. No, okay. Yeah, okay. So it is as I suspected, that for these create tests, this is look what's failing. The test create is failing. So the reason why it's failing is because there is an instance, but it doesn't have an ID yet. It's interesting. This code is actually slightly wrong, but I'm not going to worry about that. So what I want to do, so I really want this to check to be if the instance is persisted. And so we know that it's persisted if the instance ID is not none. That's the more exact thing. So there's always going to be this instance object by the time it's saved, or by the time it's cleaned. And I think the reason for that is that the model form is like setting up the instance in preparation of saving it. And it just hasn't called the save operation yet on the form which will persist the instance. And so that ID hasn't been populated yet. So now if we run the same set of tests, I'm hopeful that, yeah, we get full pass, we get the more accurate result. All right, so this is correct for the scenario. And in fact, at this point, we should be able to go to the server and let's come back to the edit page this way. We don't need to look at this anymore. So now we have the model, the many-to-many data is still set up the same way. If we uncheck this and update this break, and it says now has the message, at least one student must be on break. So we've accounted for that edge case that will cause us to get in a bind. Conversely, though, we should be able to check this, no problem, and it saves it. And now we're back here, and we should be able to uncheck this. That's not a problem. It's only a problem when we uncheck both, and it puts it back, and at least puts it back here. Okay, cool. All right, one more condition, and then I think this will wrap up the feature, actually. Good question, Quetlim. Django upgrades. Depends on how far back you have to go. If you're looking at like super old Django, and I'm talking like 1.7 time frame or something like that, you're in for a rough ride. There's a lot of change that has happened over that time period. Like the migration system switched. You know, at some point when there was a migration system that wasn't part of core Django, it was called South. Same author, Andrew Godwin, but he built it for Django and built it into Django. And there was a bumpy path there. And along the way for each of these different point releases on the 1.x series were some pretty sizable changes. The jump to 1.8 was pretty challenging. The jump to 1.11, I think, was another one that had quite some challenges to it, if I'm recalling. I mean, you know, no upgrade is necessarily super easy. But my take on it these days is that the upgrade process has gotten much better. So I think the team that has worked on Django has like gotten extra diligent about doing upgrades. So, you know, certainly if you're on like this app is on the latest 3, because it's the easiest thing to go onto. Like I've got a valid test suite. There's a lot of compatibility, and it's just very stable. To your point though, like going from Django 1.11 up, if you're already on Django 1.11, I think you're actually in a pretty good spot. It doesn't mean there won't be stuff to do. The switch to Django 2 will have changes like URL to path and RE path if you still need the regular expressions. And there's some other changes like the Django, at least in my experience, the Django guides that come with the releases that have the release notes about what to do are very descriptive of here's everything that we think has changed in this time period that we think you're going to have to pay attention to. The other challenge that to answer, like the other half of your question, probably depends on how much or how many third-party packages you have installed. If you have just a couple, then you're probably in pretty good shape, especially if they're well-supported ones, like Django All-Auth or Anymail, or things like of that nature that are very popular. You're not going to have trouble with them. It's when you have really obscure third-party packages, or if you have forked packages on your own and made your own custom changes, that might require a bunch of extra work to get those packages updated appropriately. But yeah, I think it's pretty doable. Once you get, and I think from 2 onward, the path to upgrading had gotten way easier. So like the team, at least from my observation, I don't know them directly or their experience with some of these things, but from my observation, the people working closely on Django Core Dev, and all the developers there have just really lasered in on what it means to do an upgrade and make that process as painless as possible. So the 1x, each of one of those was a little bumpy, and over time got less and less bumpy. There's a little bit of a jump to 2, but then from 2 and beyond, like I don't even remember the details with upgrading 2. It's been so trivial in my experience. That's not to say that if you use certain features, there might be things to deprecate, and there are deprecations and things that you have to clean up. But I've just found them to be pretty manageable. Hope that answers your question. All right, there is a condition here that we have missed, perhaps, that we need to factor in, or although maybe not. I'm going to talk through this, and maybe we don't actually need to do it. So, if when I've presented this app before, so in the app, it is possible to build a school year for the future that has no students in it yet. So like you can build out, you can see these grade levels and courses and stuff. You can build all that out and not actually attach a school to it yet. Like here you can see this message, there's no student enrolled. It's possible to build out the entire school year with no students enrolled at all. Oh, good. I'm glad you're on 111. I think you're in for a much smoother ride than you might fear. If you're on 1.8, I would have said like buckle up because it's going to be bumpy. But glad to hear that's where you're at. Okay, so what I was saying is that the school year has this possibility of building out the entire school year with no students enrolled. And so that means that we have to make sure that it's still possible to add a school break, that we won't hit this error. But I think that's definitely the case. And here's why I think that's okay. Because the many-to-many field is only going to be possible to populate if you had students to begin with. And when it gets created, that some of those extra instances were created, because this is only ever used in the save part of this particular form. And it's only going to add them if there are particular students. So when all the students are in break, then it clears out the form. And if there are no students enrolled, then yeah, I don't think it comes into play. So I think that convinces me that to do is not going to be necessary. Maybe my logic is off there, but I feel like that's the case. All right. So I think that gets us to the end of this feature. Let's check it out. Let's check out what's left. So we've got this extra guard clause here, or this extra clean check, I should say, that adds an error that makes sure that case when we cannot clear out users when there's existing users is never triggered. And then we have the test that asserts that that's the case, and we've got the setup here to prove it. I am going to come in here and delete this line. I like to have all of my setup portion be grouped together in a single line if I can, or in a single unbroken set. All right, let's run the coverage stuff before I push up and make sure that I'm not missing lines of code. I think I've covered everything, but this is a good sanity check to make sure that, since I'm the only one running this project, that my test suite is doing the best it can to save me from myself. This only takes about a minute or so once it gets going. So there's some anticipation as PyTest spins up and figures this out. Okay, 100% coverage, great. And all of the pre-commit checks pass, that's good news. And then we'll say fix remaining to-dos on school break student filtering feature. And we'll push this up. This is on a branch. I've been doing all this work on a branch because I didn't want to block the main line of the application. That allows me to do package upgrades. I have my my repository set up to give me package upgrades at the first of every month. I'm using Dependabot to do that. So that keeps me on the latest stuff generally, or only with a certain amount of lag. And I can isolate this feature. I could change this feature so that it's behind a feature flag, but frankly, I don't really want to. I know that sounds terrible of me, but I've been working on it and testing it for so long, and with writing so many tests, that I'm not concerned that if I deploy it, it's going to be problematic for users. I think it's going to be fine the way it is. So here we have the PR pull request that has all of these changes in it. And this is the culmination of many, many weeks worth of changes. What I'm not going to do is make you go through this with me. I think what I'm going to do instead is review this offline. So this feature is almost done, but let's just talk briefly about here are the other things that I think I need to do. If I added this feature and I didn't tell anybody, well, there's only one person aside from those that are watching this and myself that would know that, and that's my spouse, the person who had requested the feature in the first place. I could tell her it's out there. And then for everybody else, and I do have actual users, they would just have to stumble across the feature. And that's not great. So what I want to do is kind of announce it. So I have a way to write blog posts with my app. So the app is at the School Desk app, and there's a blog associated with it. And I can write content posts here describing here are the new features. And I've done that for a few of these, and you can see that I've not written one since May, so it's been a while. Kind of keeps people reminded that I'm actually doing stuff here. By itself, nobody's going to read this blog on their own. Nobody's coming to this page and checking that it's there. But I have a feature within the app that allows me to put a little present image here that shows that there's something to click on. And maybe I can show that quickly. So that would be in the sub nav. It's what's new. So let's just invert this for a second, just so you can see it. And if I, oops, this is the real site. Not going to see it there no matter how many times I refresh. Let's bring this back up and we'll refresh. And you can see this is what a user will see. And they'll see it if they have a new notification. And that notification is something that I associated with the blog post. So I add a new, it's one of my apps. Actually, we can go look at the process here. So you can see it to completion. So this is just a way of like kind of marketing within the app to help with the retention of those users that I do have. So I've got this notifications app, and I can build an announcement, which is what this is. And the announcement takes a URL and has some status associated with it. And there's a task that runs, or a little command, an administrative command. And what that'll do is, if I create an announcement and I post it and I say it's announced, it'll create a bunch of notifications. The notifications will be to anybody who is an active user of the application, so that they're a paying user or they're in their trial period. It will get a notification. So it'll show up in their page like this. When they click on it, it will take them to that blog post. And also at the same process of, if you notice where that's going, it says notifications, what's new at the bottom. So that what's new page will actually clear the notifications and set it so that the next time they return to this page, they won't see it again. So they'll get the benefit of taking to the blog post for the one time. They can read the article directly, and then they can return to the application, and this will be gone. And so their experience will no longer be disrupted. So it's just kind of a nice way to like get somebody's attention. And it is in all of the application is the one setting that I have in the app. So if people really don't want it, they can turn that off. So that's my plan for after I get this feature merged and deployed. I can put together that blog post and notify my users that there's this new feature. So that's what I'm going to do with this. This has been a long time project, and after this I probably need to do a round of some bug fixing, because there's some things that have been coming in from my users that are things that have been requested that I have not been paying attention to because I've been working on this on the stream, and so we need to get through some of those. And finally, once that is done, we'll be able to return to actually some of this. So the reason that I even did this in the first place is my spouse would like the ability to have field trips in the application. And a field trip, if you think about it, is not that much different from a school break. And so since the school breaks are already factored into the scheduling logic, I want to essentially reuse the school break and put a different kind of description and labeling on them to expose them into the application as a field trip and as something else that can be done, and a different type of thing that can be added and tracked and reported differently. Oh, thank you very much, Quellen. I appreciate you sharing, and yeah, I'm grateful. Thank you. So I think that's going to wrap us up for the evening. Hopefully you will learn something about Django tonight, get some insight into this design process. If you have been watching this feature, it's taken surprisingly longer than I wanted to, but I've only been developing during this stream. So I basically have been working on this app a couple hours a week. That's just the nature of my life right now, because kids are doing soccer and all sorts of activities that are outside of school. So life is busy. Appreciate you liking or subscribing or leaving a comment or following or wherever you're catching this from. And I want to thank you for tuning in. And with that, I wish you all good night. Take care.